Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're talking with Vikram Savkar, Vice President and General Manager of the Education and Training business for Wolters Kluwer Legal and Regulatory US, one of the largest publishers of legal casebooks, supplements, and other law-related materials in the world. Your Law School Toolbox host today is Allison Monahan, and typically I'm here with Lee Burgess. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so that you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we would love to hear from you. With that, let's get started. Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're excited to be talking with Vikram Savkar, Vice President and General Manager of the Education and Training business for Wolters Kluwer Legal and Regulatory US. They're one of the largest publishers of legal casebooks, supplements, and other law-related materials in the world. So welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
My pleasure. So before we dive in, can you give our listeners a sense of your background and tell us what it is you guys do that's actually relevant to law students?
Sure, I'm happy to. I've spent my entire career in educational publishing and educational technology, and that has meant that I've focused on finding ways to help students, primarily at the higher education level, succeed in their personal and educational and career goals. In the past, I've worked for companies like Pearson and Nature in spaces like math and science, but now for several years, I've been here at Wolters Kluwer, focusing specifically on the law school space.
And what do you guys publish that's relevant to law students? Because it's more than people might realize.
That's right. We're most famous for our iconic red and black casebooks that most law students use in most of their law school classes. You see our red and black casebooks in most movies about law school and so on, and they've been around for quite some time, and that's because they're extremely good and authoritative and very useful. But we do a lot of other things as well. We publish lots of course books in areas like legal writing and trial. We publish lots of study aids that students use quite a lot, such as the E&E series or the entire Emmanuel program that have helped a lot of students through challenging classes. And increasingly over the last 5 years, we've invested very heavily in technology, helping to bring digital tools to law students that open up new dimensions for how they can learn and how they can succeed.
Right, and today we're actually going to be talking about this evolution of the legal casebook. And in some ways, before we jump into kind of the details of that, this is really fundamentally about how knowledge is transmitted and received. And in researching this, I came across an interesting article you wrote a while back. It was about teaching what you call the Google generation. So tell me a little bit about that idea. Is this generation of law students really learning so differently from those who came before?
Well, that's a complex question. So if you have a few minutes, let me dig into that in a somewhat thorough way. The Google generation is a phrase that a lot of people use and that I like to use for the generation of students who are in law school now. They've grown up with technologies in every aspect of their life, whether it's Google or Facebook. What I think is actually most important is that they've grown up with technologies in every phase of their classwork in school, whether in K-12 school or in high school. In colleges, they've had powerful learning technologies as part of how they learn. And they've become accustomed to the idea that more than the book is necessary in order to really develop a deep and robust understanding of complex subjects. Those are the expectations that this generation of students brings to law school. Now, if you go back to what law school looked like about 10 years ago, it didn't look all that different from what it looked like several decades ago. Students came into classes and they had textbooks and they had lectures, and it was something of a sink or swim kind of environment for them. Well, the Google generation, the current generation of students, I think finds that inadequate. They're used to better tools, and they have a great demand for them. So my answer to your question is, I don't think that the current generation of students learns differently from previous generations of students. I just think they are accustomed to different kinds of tools. And if those tools aren't there, then I think they feel that they don't have everything they need to succeed. And if those tools are there, then today's students are confident, ambitious, and they learn eagerly and quickly and move on to their career goals. And that's what we as a company have tried to provide them.
Interesting. I mean, from my perspective, it's interesting too, because I obviously, I graduated, say, 10 years ago, and came out of this kind of classic experience of you go to class, you listen to the professor, you read your books. And it is interesting because we've also developed tools for people who do learn really differently, whether it's with video or in smaller chunks. And so how are you reconceptualizing legal casebooks? Are these changes you're making just for convenience, reading on the subway, on a tablet versus carrying around huge books, which, let's face it, are enormous in paper? Or is something more fundamental going on?
So I think it's both. Let's go back 5 years ago when we were doing the research behind the launch of Connected Casebook, which is our biggest digital program. Just briefly, Connected Casebook is a digital reinvention of our traditional red and black casebooks. It contains within it a really rich ebook version of the casebook, but also a study center filled with thousands of videos and questions and hypotheticals and outlining tools and social learning tools that allow students to share their case briefs with each other and so on and so forth. We launched that 4 or 5 years ago, and since then it's grown. And at this point, about 2/3 of law students in their first year use this on a regular basis. So what was the research that led us down that path? Well, we did focus groups, we did surveys with hundreds of students and faculty, and we came away with some pretty clear themes. And I'll pick 3 to illustrate both sides of what you asked me about. One theme we heard is that students really were looking for more portability than they had with their law books, because you're exactly right. Law books are not the briefest, and they're not the least dense kind of textbook out there in the world. And simply lugging 4 or 5 of them around on a daily basis between the dorm and the classroom and so on was onerous. So they were looking for portability. That was number one. But we also heard some themes that have nothing to do with convenience. Law students were looking for more opportunities to apply what they learned in the classroom. So they learned very complex subjects, but the way law school was traditionally structured, they don't have that many opportunities to practice what they learn, to put that out there and get feedback on the value of the way that they're translating those ideas into action or into conclusions. And the third thing we learned was that law students were really interested in more continual feedback so that they could know how they were doing compared to each other and compared to expectations on a daily basis. They didn't want to reach the end of the semester and only at that point find out whether they were an A or a C. So all of this led into the design of the Connected Casebook. It is portable. You can use it anywhere. But it also reinvents the value of the learning experience for the students. Because of those thousands of study questions, they can apply their learning on a regular basis. They read and apply, read and apply. And lots of science has shown that that's a much better way to learn. They also, because they get graded on the exercise that they do, find out every single day which areas of law are they excelling in, which areas of law are they struggling in, so that they can adapt and pivot on a regular basis as they go through the semester. We think that this helps make them successful. We don't like the old sink or swim philosophy. We believe every law student can succeed. And if we give them the right tools, we believe that they all will.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And that's one of the things we talk to students a lot is, look, you can't just sort of do the reading, go to class, and then never practice applying any of this. We need to figure out a way to make sure that you're actually getting this. And I think the tools that you're talking about are really fantastic, So tell me a little bit more about some of the functionality. You mentioned the study center. What else is in these that goes beyond just a paper casebook?
So we've added a lot of really interesting applications within the overall Connected Casebook over the years. We have an outlining tool, for example, based on some insights we got from the students we interviewed. Of course, outlining is a big part of law school, and it's very time consuming. And we have a tool that makes the clerical parts of that very easy. You can, as you annotate the casebook with your highlights and notes, port those directly into an outline and focus your energy on arranging the outline. Then we have a social learning environment. Of course, lots of law students like to learn in study groups within their school and in some cases outside of the school as well. So we've recreated that online so that students can share their outlines or their notes or their case briefs with each other through the platform, only with trusted confidants. So that those are a couple examples of tools that we've developed that are helping students learn faster and better. We've got a news feed that connects law students with real-world legal stories that relate to the topics they're learning in their casebook so that they can help see the real-world implications. And then really interesting, we have, which is why you and I are talking right now, just recently launched a tutoring service within the platform that helps students get on-demand help with the subjects that they find most challenging.
Yes, and we'll definitely touch on that. I have to say all these things are really fantastic. I mean, as a book briefer, someone who had my highlights out and was writing in my textbook, the outlining tool, I just love in this. It's totally amazing that I could have just highlighted in this digital textbook and then really exported all those highlights and everything instead of having to recopy them. I mean, it just seems like such an amazing time savings and one we definitely are always encouraging people to take a look at. So let's step back just a little bit. So before you worked on legal textbooks, you spearheaded a move to a digital version of a science textbook, which is pretty cool. And one of the things that was really cool in this project was the ability for students, I think it was maybe a chemistry, to manipulate molecules and that sort of thing right in the book. Do you see a day when legal casebooks might have this type of highly interactive material, whether it's interactive flowcharts, diagrams, something like sketchy law that's 3D animations? Where do you see this all going?
Well, you do really thorough research. I hadn't thought about those interactive molecules for many years, but you're right. That was one of the favorite things that we had launched back in those days in science publishing. I do think that we are heading in that direction. Of course, law is different from science. The kinds of interactivity that I think we'll build into our casebooks over time here at Wolters Kluwer aren't so much about visualizations in the same way that it is for science. I think it's more about connecting different kinds of knowledge and different kinds of content for students so that they can easily assemble it all in their minds and think about the legal topics holistically. So, for example, when you're learning something in constitutional law, you have your casebook, and you want to learn the black letter law or the case history from your casebook. But of course, there are law cases going on every day today at the Supreme Court, and there's decisions published from there that are available online. Then there's commentary about those cases in various blogs and in various other places. There's study material in the E&Es. Then there's tools and visualizations of data from various other companies out there that are helping plot these cases so that you can easily draw trends and see which kinds of cases tend to succeed at which courts and which ones don't. And right now, to assimilate all of that information and really develop a robust understanding of how to think about constitutional law in the real world, a law student has to go to 7, 8, 9, 10 different places. There is value in going to those 7, 8, 9, 10 different places, but it also takes a lot of time. I think what we have ambitions to do is eventually bring all of that kind of material together in one interactive place for the students so that they can direct their own research. You start with the casebook as a launching off point, but then you go on a kind of choose your own adventure path deep into all these other resources as far as you want to go as a student and emerge with a really, really thorough understanding. So those are the kinds of directions that we're thinking about. We are working on them, and I do think you will see them.
Well, that sounds super cool. I'd imagine kind of this dashboard of stuff. And then I was thinking, oh, maybe eventually, instead of clicking a link and going and getting a tutor, our tutor would just pop up inside of the casebook. Wouldn't that be fun? Or maybe it'll be an AI tutor. Who knows?
That would be fun, and it's a good idea, and I think we should talk about it soon.
Yes. Well, there you go. It's our idea for the day. So who do you think is really driving this move to digital materials? Is this something you guys are really pushing, or are professors receptive to it? Are students receptive to it? Who wants this?
So definitely students want this. As I mentioned, our research made clear that the current generation of law students are so used to powerful learning technologies that they feel that they're missing something if those technologies aren't there in their law school classes. So there's a great thirst and a great demand. And very largely, we are responding to that demand. And that's, I think, why our digital initiatives have been so successful, why 2/3 of students are using them, and so on. And I think they have even more pent-up demand for fresher ideas, and will continue to respond to those. Faculty also are very interested in digital for slightly different reasons. I think most faculty recognize that their students want powerful digital tools, and so are very happy for us as a publisher to invest in them and make them available in their classes. So that's how I would see it. It's coming from both places, faculty and students, but faculty, I think, largely vicariously on behalf of their students. Now, that said, there are many faculty who themselves are on the leading edge of technological innovation. They're getting involved in cryptocurrencies or AI or big data, and they're finding ways to incorporate those perspectives into law school. And those faculty are, of course, very much enthusiasts. They connect with us, and we try to work with them to make our products better. So we're being pulled into this from all sides, and of course, we as a publisher are really eager to go in this direction as well, because we do, for all the reasons I described earlier, think that this approach to content helps students succeed even more than the traditional book format.
Mm-hmm. And do you see a day coming when a professor might be able to almost remix these casebooks? Because right now, it's really a professor or a group of professors have written what they think, a student should know about constitutional law, contract law, tort law in one of these, red and black books, basically. I mean, that's really what what they're coming from. But do you see a day coming when possibly you could mix up like a version that's a mix of different existing materials? Or do you think there's something to this concept of this is how a group of people or a person thinks you should think about this subject?
So this is a really interesting question. We do already do what you're describing in print. It's called custom publishing, and we have a very good operation to help faculty do this. So not a massive number of faculty, but there is a significant and growing number of faculty who are interested in taking bits of different casebooks that we publish and combining them together for their students, because they think that different authors have different perspectives on different subjects that they like. And so we do this, and those classrooms are very happy. So the question is, do I see a future for that kind of mode in the digital world? And I do. I think it's very complicated because one of the things we take care to make sure in the print version of this is that the experience for our readers is seamless, that it doesn't feel like a Franken book, to use a phrase that we sometimes use, that it feels like a really solid experience for faculty and students, something they can be proud of, something we can be proud of. And I think we'll get there in the digital world when we feel confident that we can accomplish the same thing digitally. There is clearly demand, and we are all thinking all the time about how to do that. To get to the philosophical piece of what you asked, you're exactly right. Our business is really built on finding the best authors in every field and signing them to share their approach to teaching with the market. And we have such huge respect for the perspective that each of our authors has, and we want to keep that integrity. So in the long run, I think we're going to need to maintain a balance between the integrity of one person's perspective or one team of authors' perspective, and the need for particular classrooms to construct their experience the way they like. Where that balance ends up, we will see.
Yeah, and I think that was an interesting question you explored in the article I mentioned earlier, which was in some parts really looking at what's lost when we move to more of this search culture, where it's amazing that you or I can go in seconds on our phone and find out any piece of information. But for example, I was just walking around Rome recently, and you're in the city in this place and you're thinking, I should know more about what I'm looking at or what happened here. And, I can Google, tell me about the Pantheon, but does that really give me a sense of what I'm looking at? I don't know. So I think there is this bigger question of, what is knowledge? Basically, this is probably beyond the scope of this podcast, but, what is knowledge at this point, and how do we transmit that to the next generation?
Yeah, I think it is a really important question. So let me speak about this for a few minutes. I do think that knowledge is very different from information. Information can be data. There can be a lot of bits of information that are out there in the world But knowledge is very different. Knowledge is information that's been ingested and assimilated by a really thoughtful person. And the knowledge that we put in our books, and that we've always put in our books, is mediated through the perspective of an accomplished and experienced teacher. So this is someone who has stood up in front of students and taught them for decades. That is the kind of person whom we sign to become an author of our books, who has a really strong track record in helping a great variety of students succeed and become successful practicing lawyers. That person's knowledge is very, very distinct from information. That person's knowledge is a way of teaching, a way of explaining, a way of communicating to students. Someone who has a deep version of that is whom we try to sign for our books. And that's why, in the long run, we always want to respect the integrity of that perspective. As a student, you don't want to consume information. You want to consume that knowledge, that perspective. And that's why I think in the end we'll find a balance. There will always be a central place in what we do for that expert knowledge. At the same time, there's a growing place in what we do for making sure that learning can be user-centered, student-centered, so that the students can, to some degree, control what they learn, how they learn, the pace at which they learn it. It's a balance.
Right. I think that's absolutely right. I mean, it's great for people to be able to follow their curiosity, but they also probably need some guidance and make sure that they're not, kind of going outside of that to sources that may not be reliable or that sort of thing. So let me ask you a couple of questions that you hear express concern over people express concern over if we're moving from a paper-based system to a more digital system. So for one thing, this generation of students, the millennials for shorthand, they get a bad rap for being constantly distracted, always on their phones, that type of thing. A, do you think this is accurate? And B, do you think that having these digital casebooks is just going to make this problem worse?
I don't think it's accurate that the current generation is distracted in a detrimental way. I do think it's accurate that everyone is always on their phones, as presumably are you and I as well. I think everybody is always looking at our phones and checking our email. That's simply the way we function in the workplace or in the professional side of our lives now. But I don't think it's true that that people are distracted. And here's why. I think that attention has always been an in and out phenomenon. Maybe there are a handful of contexts in the history of your life where you've concentrated on something in an unbroken and serene and profound way for a full hour, maybe at a concert or something like that. But most of the time when we're listening to lectures or even reading books, we do so in an in and out way. You concentrate for a little while, and then your mind takes a little break, and then you check back in and concentrate again. And over the course of our lives, I think our minds become very, very good at stitching together what we need to take out of the experiences we have in this way. I think we've always done that. Maybe 20 years ago, when I was in college lectures, 25 years ago, sadly, when I was in college lectures, my mind wasn't moving from the lecture to my phone, which I didn't have at that time, but it was moving to something else, looking at my book, looking out the window for a second, and then back to the lecture. I don't think the experience that students have today of moving between their phones and the lectures and so on is fundamentally different. I'm very confident that they can handle the task of keeping their attention on what they're learning and stitch it together in a way that's really robust.
So Vikram, have you been in a law school classroom lately?
I
sit in the back row. You're like, wow, it is amazing the plethora of things that people are doing to distract themselves from what they need to be paying attention to right now.
Maybe I'm being consciously charitable, but I really do believe that people will find a way to learn. And if you look at what they accomplish when they go out of school and into the workplace, there's no noticeable drop off in the productivity and the ideas that people generate. One way or another, people are getting educated and people are being valuable to the world. So I will remain resolutely optimistic.
I think that's true, but I do think, in my opinion, it is somewhat harder than it used to be to stay focused in a classroom or that kind of thing, particularly if you're on the internet and you have, different channels going. It's just one of those things we always encourage students to really think about why they're there, what they're doing, and are they getting the most out of this. But I agree with you. In theory, it is totally possible.
Fair enough.
One other thing that people sometimes say about reading on a screen versus reading on paper is that there's not the same level of comprehension or retention. And I've also seen some studies saying that reading speed is actually the key, so people just read faster when they're reading on a screen. Do you have any thoughts on this?
It's possible that research suggests that people retain better when they're reading on paper than on screen. I still like to do both. But I think from my perspective, it's important to remember that reading a textbook is not just pure reading in the same way that you might read a novel. If you're being an effective student in law school, you're doing much, much more than reading. You're reading, then you're writing, you're taking notes, you're highlighting, you're creating your outline, then you're cross-checking what you've read against maybe your study aid or some other material. You're talking about it with your fellow students. And I think all of that other activity, which I would think of as activating what you consumed in your book, is really more important in the long run from in your learning process than the simple act of reading. Of course, you have to read and you have to learn what you're reading. But I think what counts is what you do afterwards. So I think that students are going to have perfectly satisfying experiences online, in part because they can do so much more of those other things that we talked about online than they can in print. I think they'll be fine.
You're an absolute optimist on this. So I think that's great. I mean, it sounds to me like you see reading as kind of the first step in a process, and that process itself can potentially be facilitated by some of these other tools.
That's a better way of putting it than I put it. I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I looked at the Connected Casebooks the first time, I was like, oh, wow, this is so cool. It just seems to eliminate so much of the drudgery of making an outline and things like that, so that I could actually focus on, what my end result was and really engaging with that material. So as a visual learner and someone who's lazy and didn't want to type out a bunch of outlines, I was just like, this is so fantastic.
That's great to hear.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about some of the features. So you mentioned the study center. So tell me a little bit more about what that is. Where do those questions come from and what are they?
Yeah, so the study center is something that students have access to along with all of the Connected Casebooks that they get, and it has hundreds and in some cases thousands of little bits of content, each of which is designed to help them better learn something that's in the casebook that in the casebook might be challenging to learn. These might be videos where someone is explaining in straightforward, simple ways what is covered in the casebook. There might be multiple choice questions, issue spotting exercises, hypothetical questions, all of which is designed to help students really learn, truly understand what is referenced in the casebook. Now, this content comes from our study aids that we've published for decades and that have been used by and loved by law students for decades, like our E&Es, our examples and explanations, our Emmanuel Law Outlines, and our other wonderful Emmanuel products by Steve Emmanuel. All of these sources of content have been curated by law professors, and we select what we think is most appropriate and most helpful, and we put that in the study center. So the casebook becomes a jumping off point for the law student. You read the casebook, but then you quickly jump into the study center and into all of this other content, and that's where I think a lot of the understanding and deep learning occurs.
Yeah, and one of the things that's nice, in my opinion, about the study center is students can really use that, I think, for two different types of things. One is accountability. So they have the ability to see if they've actually tried these questions or not. So, you could set goals that say, I'm going to do the study center materials in my Connected Casebook, and then if you've actually done them or not. But even more critically, you have this kind of cool tool where you can actually export what you're getting wrong and what you're getting right and then share that with people, right?
Absolutely. I think that's one of our most exciting new features, and that is a partnership that we've launched with you. And we've now made available a tutoring service to students of Connected Casebook through our partnership with Law School Toolbox. You have built up a wonderful service for law school over the years, for law students over the years, with your network of tutors, through whom students can get access to immediate and helpful insights that can be challenging to get when you're just sitting in a dorm room by yourself and reading. And you've been so successful in helping students feel confident that we wanted to make your service available to our users as well. And so that is in fact the case as of a couple of weeks ago. Law students in Connected Casebook, if they hit a challenging subject, they hit a hurdle or a snag, they can essentially press a button and be connected to you and your tutors and get human help, get personalized instruction. And in fact, they can export their results from the study center, from all the questions that they took, the questions that they got right, the questions that they got wrong, the rationales for why they got them right and wrong, export that and have that sent to the tutor so that the tutor, when she or he gets online with the student, isn't starting from zero, isn't wasting any time trying to figure out who is this student, what are they struggling with, what do they need to know. The tutor is able to really understand right away what that student finds challenging and is able to jump in right away and help the student start to understand those challenging topics. So I'm incredibly excited by this. I think it's really the next and maybe the most powerful dimension over time of what we're doing in the Connected Casebook is connecting students, not just with content, but with people.
Yeah, we're really excited as well. And I think the tutors are very excited about the idea that they will get this information if the student decides to share it with them, because then they can really drill down into, okay, you're having some issues in this topic, but it seems like you're pretty solid here. So let's focus on this. So I think just expanding that access is going to be really fantastic. Well, unfortunately, we're almost out of time. Let me ask you a couple more questions. Where do you see legal education, legal textbooks, legal supplements, that kind of thing evolving in the coming years?
Well, first of all, I think all of that is going to evolve a lot in the coming years. I think we're really fortunate right now. It's a time when law schools are very open and very eager for new ways of teaching law students. For a lot of reasons, they've all aligned on the idea that they want to explore. They're exploring clinics, they're exploring pro bono, lots of different kinds of experiential education. They're exploring digital tools in the classroom. They're trying to figure out how to incorporate AI into the classroom and how to incorporate more practice readiness into the classroom and prepare students for a legal world in which technology is a big part of what they do. There's so much experimentation and innovation going on in law schools. And I think the only thing that we can say for sure is that in 10, 15 years, law school is going to look very different from what it looks like today. Of course, there will be lectures, there will be a curriculum. But I think instead of most law students having the same kind of experience, taking the same classes in the same sequence, I think what we'll see in 15, 20 years is a lot of law students having a very personalized experience. Some core classes in common, and then a lot of time spent on activities, whether that's clinics or externships or whatever, that are of interest to that particular student trying to achieve her or his career goals. So that's where I think we're going with law schools.
Well, it sounds exciting. It's definitely going to be an interesting time. All right. So before we wrap up, where can people look if they would like more information to find out about a Connected Casebook? They don't have one, they want to get one. Where can they look?
They can go to www.casebookconnect.com, and there they can read all about the program and see the list of textbooks that we have in the program.
All right, and you have the E&Es and things often online as well, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, our tutors are really loving that. Well, unfortunately now we are out of time. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, definitely. My pleasure. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app because we would really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you are a Connected Casebook user, check out the new Law Boost tutoring and let us know what you think. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lee or Allison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.